Well, welcome, everyone, to another edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. This, of course, is the show that takes a look back at the week that was in the nation's capital through the lens of this second Trump administration, Trump 2.0. And joining me this week is host of CBN's Quick Start podcast, Dan Andros. David Brody taking a well-deserved day off ahead of this Memorial Day weekend. Dan, good to see you. How are you?
All right, I'm doing good, John.
All right, let's jump right into it here. And the big news at the end of the week was, of course, the big, beautiful bill was narrowly passed by the House. This, of course, is the tax and spending bill that will fund much of what President Trump wants to do here in his second term. How big a victory was this for President Trump and for Speaker Mike Johnson, Dan, to get this thing across the finish line? There was a lot of back and forth between the fiscal hawks with the Freedom Caucus and some of the more moderate Republicans, and of course the leadership who really, really wanted to get this thing passed before the Memorial Day recess.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a political perspective, it's a win for Trump because it shows that he can, coalesce these different factions within the party together to get a bill done, to get this going forward. And we talked about this before, they wanted to get on the same page because this is the time. This is a time for Republicans. They've got these couple years here until the midterms when, historically we've seen that sort of shift to the other party when one party's kind of got the control. So you think, okay, this is their window here to try to get some legislative victories. And so from that perspective, they got it done. And that's, Trump showing that he can rally the votes and that they can get something done. Now, it remains to be seen, if this is something that maybe conservatives, like fiscal conservatives and those who have been in years past complaining about the national debt, if this will be something that ends up adding to that. I mean, that's what some of the projection are, that it would add 3.8 trillion in debt. But a lot of that, too, is you get these tax cuts. And this is one that's always irritated me, like from a conservative point of view, is that when people say, well, you tax cuts, where are you going to get that revenue from? You lose all this revenue from these taxes. But those conservatives believe that those tax cuts are going to generate more business, more economic growth, and therefore you increase the amount of revenue you get from the government from taxes because you've made it more business friendly. People are spending more and it goes up. So that line has always bothered me. The whole, well, where are they going to get the money from? It's like, well, that's the idea, is you're going to encourage and stimulate more spending on that. So from that perspective, like, the jury will be out on that to see how it goes. But obviously, from the political side, it's a win for Trump.
Right. And that's kind of where we're looking at this just for the moment, is from the political side. And it clearly shows, Dan, that he has juice within the House Republican caucus, because we have seen before President Trump took office, when it was President Biden in the White House, all of the fighting that went on inside the Republican Party on a number of different fronts. Of course, we had Kevin McCarthy getting kicked out as Speaker. It took forever for them to settle on Mike Johnson as the new House Speaker. And a lot of credit has to go to Speaker Johnson for somehow getting this done. Now, it certainly seems as though he had a wingman in President Trump. Maybe those roles are reversed. Maybe Speaker Johnson was the wingman to the president. But when the president went to see members of the House caucus, Republican caucus last week, it didn't sound like a lot of the holdouts were swayed. But during the course of the week, it seemed as though that the president's words really did have an impact on these members of the Freedom Caucus. They were able to get some deals done, some capitulation done. But at the end of the day, it shows that the president really has a lot of sway over House Republican members. Now, the question is, Dan, what this means for the Senate, whether he'll have the same kind of sway with Republican senators who might be opposed to different portions of this package. There's going to be concerns from the fiscal hawks in the Senate. Senators Ron Johnson, Rick Scott, Ted Cruz, all are concerned about the $36 trillion in debt that we have. And I heard your argument about what they want these tax cuts to do in terms of increasing the GDP, increasing the overall strength of the economy, how that will help us in our deficit. But the deficit just keeps going up despite tax cuts that we've seen in recent years. And I love a tax cut. I mean, I want to keep more of my hard-earned money. I certainly want to, keep the tax credits we get for having children, for buying a home, all those different things. I definitely want to keep as much of my own money as possible. But there is that $36 trillion in debt. And I just wonder have we gotten to a point with the debt, Dan, that it's unsolvable? Like there's no way to make it up. Do you think Congress it feels to me that Congress has almost given up on it. Most members of Congress have given up on it. And so their expectation is we'll just keep raising the debt limit. Well, the deficit's going to keep going up. But as long as the economy is healthy, we just continue to function in this way. And that really kind of seemed to be where President Trump is on this.
Yeah, I mean, like there's, look, smarter economic minds can get into the weeds on how you can reduce that debt other ways than just, balancing the budget and all this. Like there's different, when inflation happens and stuff, then the debt, becomes cheaper, all that stuff. They can argue all that, but it is an interesting ideological kind of moment for the GOP, because this has been a talking point. Does anyone remember, what is it, usdebtclock.org or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we used to see that thing all the time. In Republican circles and conservatives posting that and saying, hey, look at this. Like, and I remember when that thing crossed, I think 10 trillion, and everybody was panicking, and it was like, how much time do we have until this all collapses? And it just spirals out of control, and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, now I think it's at, like you said, like 36 trillion or something like that. I mean, it's just kind of one of those things where it just keeps going and going and going. And, I remember back in, during the Bush years and the Obama years, it was kind of like a lot of the conservative, fiscal conservatives were arguing like, listen, both parties here are just two different parties going to the same place. One's just going a little faster than the other one, but they just keep adding on to this thing. And it kind of slowed for a little bit, but I don't see the Republicans slowing that down at all. And I think it's a concern, and it's something that, when you look at government spending, that is a conservative stalwart is, hey, like, let's cut government spending. I mean, you even had Doge coming in here, like, let's look for all the wasteful spending that we can cut. And I think that would be a generally popular thing all across the board if people, could see that it would actually have an impact on the national debt. But as someone just kind of a lay person on the deeper side of the economics, like I'm not comfortable with that debt at all. And it just seems like at some point we're going to have to answer for that.
Or pay it, right? I mean, at some point you've got to, the debt has to be paid for in some way. And you and I are both not economists, so we don't, how that's going to happen at some point someday, when that would be. I don't have any better idea than you do or most other folks and I think that's the thing is the debt doesn't seem really real. It doesn't really seem impactful in our everyday lives. And so it's kind of an issue you can put on the back burner. And we allow our members of Congress and we elect presidents for whom this is not a major issue. There are some members of Congress, though, for whom this is a major issue. I mentioned Ron Johnson, Rick Scott, Ted Cruz. There are other members in the Senate who have other issues with the House bill. You have Republicans like Josh Hawley and Susan Collins who want to make sure that Medicaid isn't cut into too deeply. Hawley's been very outspoken, warning against making cuts to Medicaid, how that could affect Republicans in the midterms if they did that. You have some of the other things. There are concerns by Democrats that low-income people getting food aid could see some of that money gone because it's being shifted to the states rather than funded from the federal government. And there's some states that have less of an ability to feed everybody in their state who might need it. Clean energy tax cuts are gone. The salt tax deductions could be messed with in the Senate. And that kind of brings me back to the question I asked you just a second ago. There are fewer senators that it sounds like the president would have to wrangle, but they're all interested in their own different pieces of this and might want to make changes to their own different pieces of this. How do we think the president is going to be able to arm twist, convince, cajole Senate Republicans who a lot of times are more likely to assert their independence than maybe their House colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, that is the $64 billion question or whatever that game show was.
There may be no answer to it.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I think he had this success, in the House, and maybe that was a surprise to some that he was able to kind of like Freedom Caucus get them on board and things of that nature. So, this is what he hangs his hat on: the art of the deal and the deal making. And so, I think he's got a good shot of it if you're seeing people kind of relent on the debt issue and you're seeing maybe some other fiscal conservatives come along. Maybe that will encourage some others to say, all right, well, we can do this. I mean, because there are things on there that are positives, from a conservative point of view, you're looking at the eliminating those clean energy handouts, as you mentioned there. A lot of times people see those as sort of, you look at some of these solar boondoggles that the government is engaged in before. They put out, billions of dollars, they get nothing for it. And, these companies end up going belly up. So there are some things in there that are very good that even a fiscal conservative could be on board with. So, yeah, I mean, time will tell, but given the early momentum he's had on it, I think he's got a decent shot.
Well, and one of the methods that Republicans and the Trump administration officials inside said was going to help pay for some of the things that were going to be a part of the big beautiful bill and other items on the president's agenda were the income that the U.S. would get from tariffs that they were putting in place. And we've seen those tariffs on Liberation Day be announced. A lot of them pulled back as new trade deals are being worked on. There are frameworks for some trade deals in place, but nothing set in stone because trade deals take a really long time to hammer out, right? They take 12 to 18 months to really get all the fine points done of new trade deals with different countries. So it's a long game. Getting them memorandums of understanding are good, but they can maybe hold off, put your foot in the door or finger in the dam for tariffs for a particular country. But on Friday morning on Truth Social, the president announced that these negotiations that they've been having with the European Union are not going well. And he announced that the EU has been very difficult to deal with, and that as a result of the fact that these negotiations don't seem to be going anywhere, that starting on June 1st, a 50% tariff on all things coming from the European Union would go into effect. So the tariffs would essentially double on everything coming out of the European Union. I'm curious what you think, given how the president has put some of these tariffs or these tariff threats in place and then pulled back on them right here. Are these tariffs a negotiating tool more than they are a driving economic policy of the president? Because it seems to me as though they're being used as a stick, as opposed to something that he really wants to build the American economy around.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if you look at China, for example, like in his first term, he actually did enact tariffs on China, and then you saw it, and so we did get those raised. They were down in like single digits, I think, in percentage wise before he did the tariff on there, and they went up a little bit, and I think they went up to 18% or something like that. I think the average tariff, from China, imports from China was like 5 to 8% or something like that, depending on the product. In the first term, then he enacted them. They went up to, I think, 18%. And then we saw in this term, that he had the wild ride of, 125%, and then you bring it back down. But at the end of the day, after all of this negotiating, we started in the single digits, and then now, it's settled into like a 30% thing. And everyone's like, "Ooh, it's not 120%." But now you have this 30% tariff on there from everything from China. Who pays that? American companies pay that. What do American companies? This is what Trump said. Oh, Walmart should just eat the cost. Well, companies aren't going to just eat the cost. If you have to pay more for it, you're going to pass that cost on to the consumer because it's just part of your cost in bringing this product to market. So I think it's going to be a similar sort of situation here. It looks like if he continues his trend like he did with China with this, you throw the 50% number out there, then it goes, eventually they'll settle on something lower. But what's it going to land at? Is it going to be higher than it was before? And if so, that's a tax on the American consumer. And I think what we've seen from the markets, John, so far is that, okay, they may not freak out at a tariff, but what they don't like is the constant just throwing the random numbers out. We don't know what's going on.
Right.
And it seems like the market just likes predictability. And if they know, okay, we're going to get this and that's what's going to happen, the markets will steady after that. So I think as long as he keeps doing this tactic where he just throws out a number and then we'll see where it lands, like in the short term, you're going to have some sort of tumult on the market. And but at the end of the day, if we end up just getting higher taxes, higher tariffs on these things, that's just going to keep costs up for people. So again, we've talked about it, long-term play. I mean, the idea is, well, let's get everybody just making things here in America, and then there won't be a tariff. That's going to take a while for those things to happen. And not to mention, we have a union issue here at home. The reason why everyone goes overseas to make these things is because it's expensive to make it here in America. So prices will still be higher on things if you can't get them from around the world at cheaper prices. So It's an interesting gambit, as we've mentioned before, but I do think ultimately it looks like it's going to lead to higher costs.
Yeah, it could be like putting the ketchup back in the bottle after you've spilled it. I mean, that's a difficult thing to unwind,
right.
Given everything that's happened over the last 20, 30 years in American business. I want to move on to Trump versus Harvard, Dan. The battle between the nation's wealthiest university and the Trump administration continues. This week, President Trump announced that all international student enrollments would halt, a move that would be a major hit to the funding source for the nation, for Harvard, and it would affect about a quarter of the student body. This all has to do with the Trump administration's position that the university allowed for a hostile and dangerous environment for Jewish students last year during the protests of the Gaza war. We've seen Harvard presidents before, members on Capitol Hill, where they were questioned about anti-Semitic threats made against Jewish students there, and it was in an unsafe environment. And we saw, the president of the university on the hot seat, failing to answer a lot of the questions adequately for members of Congress, and certainly for members of the Trump administration who are moving forward with this. And now Harvard has sued the Trump administration, saying that the ruling or the demand that the university stop allowing, or that the government was going to stop allowing international students to come to the U.S. to attend Harvard, violates the First Amendment, constitutional due process, as well as the Department of Homeland Security's own regulations. These students are admitted, Dan, via the Student and Exchange Visitor Program certification, which is run by the DHS. What are your thoughts on this? And I'll just kind of jump in to start by asking this question. Are we comfortable with any presidential administration blocking a university from deciding on who they can and cannot admit into their college? Would we be comfortable if a Democratic president was getting themselves involved in, say, the type of student that a Christian university would be allowed to enroll?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a perfect world, you would want the government to kind of be out of these sorts of things and out of the way, and let these schools do what they want to do, and let them have, a full, First Amendment on that. But the reality is, this is sort of the playing field that has been established. What we saw, from the Biden administration and other Democratic administrations, where they have attached basically rules, for a lack of a better term, that come along with, if you accept federal funding, you have to go along with this. The bathroom issue being a case in point. If you want your federal funding, well, then you better let everyone, we say, use, men using girls' bathrooms. You have to do that, or else you're at risk of losing your federal funding. So I think we're coming off the heels of that. And so this administration is saying, well, if that's what you're going to do, if you're going to tie behaviors to federal funding, well, we don't like this behavior of you supporting openly and not condemning hard enough these basically Hamas apologists at times on these campuses. And so in a perfect world, no, you wouldn't want the government interfering on this, but this is the playing field that's been set, and I think that's the reason the Trump administration can be bullish on this, is because this is what the previous administration does, especially when these schools take federal funding. And I think at the end of the day, for these colleges and universities, I think you have to realize you're putting yourself at risk here. If you accept that federal funding, you're putting yourself at risk for having strings attached. And they're going to have leverage on you now if they say, you know what, that's not going to fly. We're pulling the funding if you don't do X, Y, and Z. You put yourself at risk at that. And so the best thing these schools can do is to not be reliant on federal funding, and then they wouldn't have to worry about any of this.
Sure. And in this case, in this particular case, it's not so much the federal funding as it is the fact that these students have to go through DHS in order to come to the United States. Right. And that seems to be the issue here. It's the utilization of funding. Yes, I mean that's just, and so I think that's going to be the interesting point when it comes before the courts. And obviously this is going to be before the Supreme Court, I would imagine. I imagine what we will see is what we've seen with recent court cases, is that a lower court will rule in favor of Harvard, whether it's the first time it comes before a court or it's the second time before it comes before a court, as the judicial branches using their co-equal part of being the branch of government to put a stop to this, and they'll issue the nationwide injunction. And of course, there's that Supreme Court case with birthright citizenship, where the ruling is mostly going to be about injunctions, nationwide injunctions, and whether or not a judge someplace could stop the Trump administration's policy against Harvard from going into place. So these cases are all kind of intertwined like this, but that's what we're going to likely see. We'll likely see the Trump administration's policy on this put on hold while the courts go through it until it comes to the Supreme Court, or until the Supreme Court rules on the birthright citizenship case. Either way, this is going to be argued within the merits of the law, whether or not it does violate DHS policy. There's nothing stopping DHS from changing their policy. That's the other thing too. So if the lawsuit rests on the policy of the Department of Homeland Security, well, Secretary Kristi Noem, other members of the Trump administration can change the policy, but then that would affect the policy for all colleges. And then there's the potential of a brain drain in America if that happens. There's a negative consequence to that too. So, there's ripple effects to everything, and we don't know what the ripple effects far down the line would be for this. But, I think you're right, Dan. I think in the previous administration, a precedent was set about behavior at schools and colleges and universities being tied to federal money, federal involvement, federal grants, federal approval of things. And this is kind of like another arm of that. Makes me uncomfortable a little bit that these two things are so closely intertwined. But, I do understand the Trump administration's desire to make universities safe for everyone on campus, and using the resources at their disposal to try and do that. It's just it's a tough thing to do. It's a tough
and it puts Democrats in a weird position, because it's not a good hill to die on here to be like, let those Hamas supporters say what they want to say. Especially when you hang your hat on, we want diversity, inclusion, and everyone to feel safe and loved, to have a safe space here. Well, how is a Jewish student feeling safe when people are running around saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free? How is a Jewish student feeling safe on that? And I've seen a lot of these videos from these campus protests, and they're vile and ugly, and would not be tolerated if they were directed at pretty much any other group.
Last thing, Dan, before we get out of here, and President Trump this week held a dinner for investors in his meme coin, reportedly a $1 million per seat on average buy-in on the crypto coin here. About 200 wealthy crypto buyers came to Washington. It wasn't a White House dinner. It was not held at the White House. It was held in Washington, D.C. at Trump's golf course here in the nation's capital. We don't know most of the people who were in attendance, and that is, of course, a concern to Democrats who want to know who is coming to this dinner. Is this being used to try to buy influence in the Trump administration? The White House defends it. They say that this was done during the president's personal time, that he did not do this, that he did not hold this as an official White House event, and therefore they're not obligated to release the names of the people who attended the dinner. But this has some folks concerned that what you're seeing here is an attempt by some of these crypto buyers to peddle influence with and influence the White House and economic policy. And also there's concern that it's enriching the Trump family and using the auspices of the White House to do that, which again is something, of course, Republicans were ripping President Biden and Hunter Biden and the Biden family, calling them the Biden crime family in the last administration as well. So your thoughts on this dinner, the wisdom of it, the optics of it, and whether or not this was a good idea.
Okay, for starters, I just want to know who has. It must be nice to have millions of dollars to just kind of take a flyer on a meme coin.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's just kind of, that's my first thought is, wow, must be fun.
Yeah. They're not planning on a budget, Dan.
No, they're not. And the second thing though is on the whole, using the White House like to gain, money or business influence. To me, I think Trump's a little unique in that because he had such a big brand beforehand that he doesn't really need the office of the White House, in my opinion, to, rally these sorts of things. I mean, I think he's kind of proven that he's been a successful business person outside of the White House. So I don't know that there's a ton of. I mean, you definitely want to watch this and like see. It would be nice to know who is there. the other thing is Trump is you don't have to spend millions of dollars to get him to like you. All you have to do to get him to like you is say nice things about him. And he seems to like people. So like he will, if you say nice things about Trump, he's going to be happy with you. So it would be nice to know who these people are, because you definitely, it's better to know those things than not know those things. But Trump doesn't strike me as the type of guy who's going to be pushed around on what to do.
Right.
By somebody just because of their influence.
Right. And I think what you'll hear is most Americans just don't care. I would like to know, because I think it's important. I would like to know, and just I always opt for transparency whenever possible, as long as it doesn't involve national security, or government secrets. I always opt for transparency whenever possible. And he was speaking behind a podium at this dinner with the presidential seal on it, so it wasn't an official White House event. They said it was during his personal time, but when you're speaking behind the seal, you're kind of speaking as the president, and when you're the president, you're always the president. There's never a time you're not the president of the United States. You might be on vacation playing a round of golf, and he's on the 18th green getting ready to chip in or whatever, and he's the president while he's doing all that too. So it's hard. I think for that particular job, it's hard to argue like this is off the clock, this is on the clock, because as a president, you're pretty much on the clock. I guess I'm fascinated overall, Dan, and we'll finish with this, by cryptocurrency just in general. Like, how did we just go about making up a whole new currency on our own? We just decided that this internet currency was going to be actually valuable for something. Like, why is there a way for us to create our own currency? I mean, how did this happen? I know blissfully little about cryptocurrency.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, if you want to go on some deep dives on like YouTube and stuff because I don't understand the full depths of it all and how it all works. But I mean, essentially, it's a decentralized, currency. I think 2009 was about when Bitcoin was started, maybe something like that, or at least became official or whatever. But Bitcoins, anybody can start a cryptocurrency, as we've seen. There's a lot of meme coins out there, but you need a big user base. Number one, for it to be, kind of effective and stable. And you also need to have a bunch of tech security. And so Bitcoin has all those things, and that's why, and it's decentralized. Now, the newer ones, you'll see like it'll have a group of people and it's run by so-and-so. That makes people uncomfortable. The person who started Bitcoin, I don't even think anybody knows who it is. And they've disappeared. And there's also a limited, I think there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin or something like that. There's some limited number of Bitcoins, so that scarcity is going to give it value. So that one has real value. The other ones, they can try it, but they're going to need to get those things like a user base, have it be decentralized, have that security be top notch. And Bitcoin has those things. So I think it's probably relatively easy to start one, but it's a whole nother ballgame to make it grow beyond meme coin land.
Yeah, see, I'm so out of left field on this, because, and I'll admit that I'm out of my depth talking about cryptocurrency, but I hear people talk about mining for cryptocurrency, and immediately I'm thinking like, how are you mining? Like, what are you mining exactly? Like, where are the mines?
Yeah,
because it's not actual mining, It's like, but I don't know exactly what it means. I don't know. Like, I need something I can touch. I need something that I can hold in my hand. Like, it's an exchange of one thing for another. Like, it just, when it's all digital, like the non-fungible tokens, no. I
try not to think about it, John, because I think at one point, like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, I was like, asking all these questions. How do you even get this? It's not like now where you have like a digital wallet and you can just go on PayPal and just buy yourself some Bitcoin. Right. Like you had to do all those shenanigans. And I remember looking into it, and I was like, sounds like too much work. And I'm just looking back at old 10, 15 years ago, Dan, going, come on, you should have powered through and figured out how to mine that thing. And now it's Bitcoin's at whatever, and you got all these Bitcoin billionaires running around. But I missed the boat on that.
Well, you could have also gotten scammed. A lot of crypto scams out there too. Just as easy to lost your house as been able to afford one twice the size with crypto, in my opinion. But I don't know. I will admit, I don't know the first thing about it, but it is interesting. We'll see what comes of the dinner, if anything comes out of it. But in the meantime, we will leave things there for this week's edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. Dan Andros, make sure you check out the Quick Start podcast, folks. If you're not a daily listener, download it on your Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is you get your podcasts. And it's on our CBN News YouTube channel as well. Dan, thank you for joining me here on Navigating Trump 2.0 once again.
All right. Thanks, John.